particularly special few hours. We've talked a lot about leadership. Kim led us in that conversation yesterday, and we're going to have the pleasure in the next 2 hours to hear from leaders at a moment when I can think of virtually no other moment during my adult lifetime when leadership was more needed. And so it's a real opportunity. I just wanted to take a minute, though, before we move on to the weighty topics, to just say thank you to a few folks. I want to give another thanks to Rita of the MasterCard Foundation and Bob of the MacArthur Foundation for last night's lovely dinner and wonderful conversation. So I did want to say thanks again to them. But I also wanted to thank, we have leaders, and the leader of the Global Philanthropy Forum's board is Lorene Powell-Jobs. And so she's, there are board chairs that know how to support an activity, and there are board chairs who throw their whole heart into supporting and leading that opportunity, and that's Lorene. And Peter Robertson, similarly, who is the chairman of the organization that's the host institution, the World Affairs Council. I also wanted to thank the steering group and advisory council. You're peppered throughout the room. You have been with us from the very beginning. You are the GPF in many respects, and we feel very, very lucky indeed. They and I am supported by a team that's pretty amazing, and you've gotten to know them. They move very quickly. You have to kind of grab them as they go by. But Susie Antunian, Sylvia Hassan, Ashley Ray, and Suwako Sonayama, Nicole Wood, Brett Mariam, and Brett Dobbs. And some of you are meeting for the first time our colleagues who are leading philanthropy forums. You know Marcos Casil and Paolo Fabiani from the Brazil Philanthropy Forum, and many of you have gotten to know Pearl Darko, who is leading the African Philanthropy Forum, and so that's been special fun for us. I told you I guess the first day, whenever that was, that we were introducing music more deliberately into what we do, and Michael Olmsted and Gary Malkin, I think have changed these last 3 days in wonderful ways. Their music somehow introduces peace at the moment when you're most agitated about solving a problem. So I wanted to thank them and to thank Maya Kristen, who introduced this to them and supported this effort. So Michael and Gary, you're pretty neat. Now you're going to get surveys. It wouldn't be the Global Philanthropy Forum without them, and life will be so much easier for you if you fill them out, because otherwise you'll get harassed by us. And I just want you to know that next year's forum will be in Washington, D.C. It'll be April 22 to 24, so sign up soon so that we don't get too full too fast without you. Mo Ibrahim will be speaking, as well as Hadil Ibrahim, his really remarkable daughter who leads the foundation, and the founder and co-chairman of Natura Cosmetics Company from Brazil will be there speaking. And I think given this morning's panel, the more we hear from private sector leaders committed to achieving social goals, the greater the opportunity for all of us to make a difference. Now, I have a real honor right now, and that's the introduction of Nabil Fahmy, His Excellency Nabil Fahmy. He's the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Egypt, of its interim government. I knew him back when his portfolio was non-proliferation, nuclear arms control and non-proliferation. He was among the members of the UN Secretary General's Advisory Board on disarmament issues, and in fact became the chair of that board. And you learned last night, of course, that he was a colleague of Bob Gallucci's as well. He was also ambassador to Japan. He was ambassador to the United States, so he has held the senior positions in diplomacy throughout his life. And after he left the world of diplomacy, he only got away with leaving it briefly, but after he left it, he joined the political party, the Constitution Party, that was headed or is headed by Mohammed al-Baradei. And you all know Mohammed al-Baradei as the leader of the International Atomic Energy Agency. In other words, the great implementer when it comes to nuclear nonproliferation. But then, Minister Fahmy then went to a really hard political post, and that is that he joined American University as a faculty member. And you don't know tough diplomacy and hard politics until you're in an academic institution. So we're going to hear, I'm going to find out from him how he did after we learn about Egypt. So finally, just to say, of course, we all know that Egypt is going through an extraordinary and wrenching transition, and this is the moment for leadership. So please join me in welcoming Minister Fahmy.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you want me to go directly? Thank you very much, Jane. That was a very kind and flattering introduction. I worry when people flatter me that much at the beginning of my speeches, because it always makes the speech a bit of a downside. When they come at the end, it's different. But anyway, thank you all for being here. Thank you I'm honored to be invited to this conference. I have to say that I have tremendous appreciation for the work that you do. Having been in the public service throughout my life and then in academia for a short period of time, I understand the importance of philanthropy. I also understand the importance of the civil society in the public domain in defining the issues and the terms for the future. A very prominent Arab poet who was actually an expat in America, Khalil Gibran, once said that generosity is in giving more than you can, and pride is in taking less than you need. And I think most of you in participating in this area are testimony to the importance of humanity and engaging in building a better future, not only for yourselves as successful people in your industries and in your professions, but also for those who may be more needy or less successful, but nevertheless are part of the international society that we're all part of. I'm happy to be here also. First of all, it's raining, and rain back in Egypt is a blessing. So I'm very happy that you could actually organize the weather as well to give us some water. And I'm happy to see Jane. I've frequently met with her when I came to San Francisco on previous occasions. But mostly, I'm really happy just to come here and talk to you about our own region, what we're trying to do back home in Egypt, and how it affects my portfolio specifically. I deal with foreign affairs, and that's my focus, and that's where I'm going to start. But I'll try also to talk a little bit about what's happening locally, because you cannot have a foreign policy that's disassociated from your domestic situation, even if your direct responsibility is more on foreign policy. Anyone who looks at the Middle East, and frankly, any of you who've listened to President Obama just today, even though he was in Asia when he made this statement, anyone knows the Middle East is in trouble. Everything is coming up in arms at the same time. First of all, we have a huge demographic bulge towards youth, which is good, but it's a factor for change. But many of issues that we took for granted, our identity, are being now raised and challenged. There's more of a focus on sectarianism, on ethnicity, rather than on the national identity of states in the region. And you see this in the debates, whether they are about Sunni Shia among Muslims, about Muslims and non-Muslims, about Kurds, and so on and so forth, Persians and Jews. They're all part of the Middle East, and of course the Christians, be they Copts in Egypt or Christians throughout the Middle East. More and more one listens to what I never listened to in the past, somebody introducing himself by his faith or his ethnicity, and then his nationality. And that's something, frankly, which disturbs me. It disturbs me not because I don't take those issues seriously, but because in our day and age, and our international system, we are trained and we've put together a system which is based on the nation-state concept. Now, we cannot stop there, because the last 50 years or so and the influence of technology have brought in many different concepts. So one can't ignore ethnicity, can't ignore the issues of faith. Even in my own country, they've become quite prominent. One can't ignore new elements that are part of the international debate, like human security, for example, which are things which were not on the table when the UN was first put together. But if this is at the expense of your national identity, it really rocks the boat in the Middle East. And you see this from the west in North Africa right through to the Mashriq, to the Levant in Syria, Lebanon and Jordan, and also down towards the Gulf. I'd add to that not only is there a problem of identity, there's also a problem of statehood and of good governance. Put yourself in my position. Responsible for foreign policy, I look westwards and I have essentially a failed state on my west in Libya. I have some very good, sensible, sincere government officials, but they don't really have complete control over their own country, and they admit that. And it's an extremely serious issue, even though it's actually a rich country. So when you actually have a failed rich country, it's probably even worse than having a failed poor country, because then the consequences can actually be much greater. Look towards Sudan. It's just been divided a couple of years ago into two countries. They're still getting settled, and there are disturbances in southern Sudan presently. If I look eastwards, I mentioned President Obama. He just suggested that it may be necessary to take a break from the Palestinian-Israeli peace process, because neither side is able to take difficult decisions. I understand his frustration, and I'm aware of the details, and I applaud Secretary Kerry for his efforts. That being said, taking a break from efforts to achieve peace is always a challenging and risky business. But it may be necessary, and I'll have more discussions with John when I get up to Washington. If you go further on eastwards, what's happening in Syria is raising major concerns, specifically about this issue of sectarianism and nationhood and so on and so forth. But I would add to that, in that area, but not only there, another challenge to the Middle East, not only sectarianism, but extremism and terrorism. And I use both of those terms because I mean extremism both in terms of ideological extremism and then extremism in terms of the use of violence, specifically against civilians. If we start being complacent about these things, about allowing people's minds to go towards extremes and intolerance, you will end up creating a very difficult situation, not only between the states of the region, but even in our own countries. And I would add a third element, or a fourth element at this point. I am seriously concerned about issues of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. Technology is by definition, you can't really control technology for too long. You can manage it a little bit and regulate it a little bit, but ultimately the power of destruction, be that from conventional weapons or be that from weapons of mass destruction, be they chemical, biological, or nuclear, especially if you downsize your targets, is really growing in that region. Now add that threat to failed states and sectarianism and ethnicity, it's really a definition of a very difficult area. Now, let me add to that what's happening back home, and I shift quickly to that because I claim that we have to bear in Egypt a special responsibility in the region. Not because we're the oldest or we're the greatest or we're the mother of the world. We like to claim all of those, and I'm happy to repeat them to you. But I say that out of a sense of responsibility. In the absence of an active, tolerant, centrist, progressive role by Egypt, the region loses its focus. Egypt has to be a centrist, tolerant country. We need to be a model for the Arab world in the 21st century. When I say this, I'm not in any way ignoring the difficulties we're going to face, but I'm simply defining the challenge that we have to meet. And let me just give you some numbers. A quarter of the Middle East lives in Egypt. There are about 90 million Egyptians, and there are about 350 million Arabs. So that comes out approximately to a quarter of the Middle East. Our influence, our intellectual influence throughout the region, not only the good influence, but also the bad influence, is much wider than any other country in the region. I say this respectfully. So that's another element that places the responsibility on us. And thirdly, we are the country that has the most deep-rooted, complex, and multidisciplinary system of government and different talents that allows us to be active on WTO issues in Geneva or in Bali recently, on issues of the Security Council in New York, on issues of Africa, in the Arab League, disarmament issues all at the same time, while most countries in the region tend to focus on one or two issues in particular. And then, of course, we have the Arab issue. We are the leaders of the Arab world. I just gave you the numbers figures. But if you look at in terms of our political weight, our military weight, the economic potential even, you will see that that's really where the influence lies. And therefore that comes with it a responsibility. Now, how can we exercise the responsibility with everything happening in Egypt? As I said, I will only be satisfied if we create a model state, model progressive Arab state for the 21st century that is proud of its Arab heritage, recognizes its African roots, but is part of the world. Part of the world by being proactive in developing the principles of international system, but also in respecting those principles. At the end of the day, we will agree with some of them, we will disagree with others, but we're part of the world and we cannot ignore them. Now, just my background is in physics and math, so I tend to sort of fall on numbers, but they're also easy to use as analogies. From 1952, when we became a republic, when the king left, to 2011, we had 4 presidents. From 2011 till June 1, or let's be cautious, June 15 this year, we will have had 4 presidents. We will have had 2 revolutions in 3.5 years. The last one before that was 50 years, 60 years before that. 56% of the Egyptian population is 25 years and younger. 60% is below the age of 30. And because of technology, there's a free flow of information in and out, and any government official who claims otherwise doesn't know what in the world he's talking about, because believe me, information is available. We don't try to prohibit it, but even if we did, we couldn't stop it. People see the information, they think about it, they want to have choices. We had 2 revolutions for the same reasons. One, the youth bulge. Youth want change, that's positive. That's the first thing. The second thing is the information exchange. Choices. I used to compare myself with my neighbors. My son compares himself with Italians, Chinese. He was working and investing in Egypt. 10 days later, he came and gave me the keys to his company and said, I'm going to live abroad. So what do you mean? I said, yeah, I got a job on the internet last week. He's not competing with his peers back home. He's competing internationally. And that's what the population is doing. And thirdly, we had bad governance. If it was good governance, the first two elements would be positive elements rather than negative elements. Those who went out in 2011 and 2013 went out for exactly the same reason. Different presidents, different parties, but the same reason. They wanted to be part of defining Egypt's future. They didn't see that in 2011 with former President Mubarak and the National Democratic Party, the Watani Party, excuse me, and they didn't see that with former President Morsi, with the Muslim Brotherhood as the ideological foundation for where he was going. In both cases, they felt they were being left out. Ironically, both presidents didn't hear them, and they went out on the street again. All that being said, I won't get into the debate about the semantics. These are people that are awake. They want to participate in the future. They hold people like me accountable in the short term and publicly, very, very quickly. I'm getting used to being a diplomat in the media. For my 35 years in foreign ministry, I chose when to speak to the press. Now they choose when to speak to me, and we have to balance that out. I'm told to stop, so I will stop in 30 seconds. The next Egyptian president will have a series of very important challenges before him. To respond to these people that are now awake, but have not yet decided what their political system will be, except that it has to allow them participation, and it has to be inclusive. For the last year or so, we've been trying to define, okay, what is the basis for the future? And the first thing we did was write up a constitution, and that was accepted by referendum. If you compare that constitution to anybody else's constitution, you will see that on civil liberties, and this is the point that I want to make really, on civil liberties, it is extremely progressive, especially for a country living in a conservative area like the Middle East. One can argue about some of the other things, but on civil liberties, it's extremely progressive. The next president will have to respond to this expectation that the people want to be part of the process. Secondly, he's going to have to deal with a very tough economic challenge. We need to create about 800,000 new jobs every year. We cannot do that without a growth rate of 9 to 10% annually for the next 10 years. And we cannot do that without securing the country, because a lot of our economy is based on tourism and on investment. So security is going to be of paramount importance. You can't deal with the security issue without dealing with the politics. You can't deal with the politics without dealing with the security issue, because one thing, and I will close and then give Jane a chance to sort of challenge me on everything I've said. The basic problem we had last year, I did not vote for the last president, for former President Morsi. In fact, I didn't vote for either of the candidates. But I didn't vote for him. But I came out publicly and said afterwards that didn't vote for you, but you're my president. That's how the system works. The problem, however, was even though he won, he didn't accept me as one of his constituencies. So it wasn't that the quote-unquote secularists or liberals, for lack of a better term, didn't accept the choice. Most of us didn't like the choice. But what we didn't accept was we were not going to be left out and create an Egypt that is going to be exclusive for a particular point, a particular ideology. That is because we didn't have a constitution then. That's why we couldn't wait for 4 years. Otherwise, you have a good president, you have a bad president, you survive it until the next one comes around. But if there's no constitution that's inclusive, you then go into changing the identity of the country, the basic parameters of civil liberties, and so on and so forth. This next president will have to bring the country together, but his priorities will have to be, because there's no other logical way of doing that, security first, politics and economics second, or together as second and third. And to do that, he will not only have to be active in fixing our domestic situation, but I can't promote tourism if I can't link European and Western tourists to Egypt and then to Jordan. I can't create Egypt as a regional hub for investment for Japanese investors if they don't feel that they can export their products throughout North Africa and East Africa and into the Arab world because there's instability. So we will also have a proactive foreign policy. We don't have a choice. We import most of our foodstuffs, the majority of our foodstuffs. We import energy. Our water comes from beyond our borders, and our military equipment, most of it comes from beyond our borders as well. So we are a country that its destiny is to have a foreign policy and relations with all of the players around the world. I know what you're going to ask me about. I'm going to sit down and give you a chance to say, why didn't you mention this? And I'll explain to you why, but on your initiative rather than on mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Fahmy. You talked about, in essence, pluralism, having a tolerant society that recognizes and accepts differences. In modern day, in Egypt's modern history, have there been periods in which you could argue that it's been a pluralistic society, or are you trying to create something quite new for Egypt?
It's a great question. And I frequently say, and I say this honestly, because I feel I'm on a mission that has a timeline on it. I'm not used to being foreign minister, and I will speak my mind even if it's not what I'm supposed to be doing. We have a pluralistic society, but we don't yet have pluralistic political ethics. That has been eroded slowly from 52 onwards, and it reached the extreme last year. We used to have that in the 20s and 30s, but do we have it now? No. And Egyptians have no problem agreeing with each other. Their problem is disagreeing with each other. And that's the point I was making a minute ago. I was not going to vote for an Islamist candidate for president in the first election because I still wasn't knowledgeable enough, frankly, on their political thinking and wasn't comfortable with it. But I accepted the president. He did not accept me. And the difference is you can win a majority. You gain power and responsibility. You gain the power to exclude others. Mm-hmm. This new government has to do the same thing once the president and the parliament is elected.
When you look to Tunisia, this may be sui generis, but I'm wondering about lessons learned. There's a situation in which they followed a highly inclusive process in developing the constitution. And it was a constitution that did allow for the peaceful rotation of power. But interestingly, it also gave equity between men and women, and also gave you the right to believe or not believe. Right? You had a choice between in your personal spiritual life. Is that a process and an outcome you imagine for Egypt?
That's exactly why I mentioned the issues of civil liberties in the new constitution. I'm very proud of them. They enshrine the right to believe in anything you want to believe in, any faith whatsoever. They specifically say women are equal. I mean, on civil liberties, this is not a constitution that will be challenged in any Western debate. You may debate the role of the military, issues like that, but even those issues, by the way, are specified in the Constitution to be only for 2 election cycles, after which they go back to the normal circumstance. And they're done like that to take into account what happened over the last 3 years and to ensure some stability. But look at this new Constitution, and the point you're making is important. There's a misperception abroad, and we make the mistake frequently in the way we talk about this. We have members of political Islam participating in politics today in Egypt. The Salafis, the Noor Party, others are all participating. The party that is not participating is the Muslim Brotherhood, or the Muslim Brotherhood movement is not participating. So don't assume that political Islam does not have a role in Egypt's future. It does. But those who want to participate have to accept others as Egyptians, and they have to pursue their goals. I mean, they have to accept others, and they have to put their nationality ahead of their ideology. Thirdly, they have to pursue their goals peacefully. I'll share with you a quick story. When the year before last, when I was not in government, very frequently Western guests used to come in. I was not a revolutionary. I don't claim to be one. I wanted change, but my generation didn't revolt. I was a bureaucrat. But anyway, I was supportive of what the changes, and my Western colleagues who I'd met in diplomacy came to Cairo and said, "You secularists, all you do is talk and write articles. What do you want me to do, throw bombs? You're peaceful if, when you're in trouble, you do not use force. It's not you're going to use violence going to the bakery. It's what do you do when you're in trouble. We were in trouble last year. We wrote articles. We gave interviews. We tried, not very successfully, we tried to establish engaging political parties. That's the criteria for, is this a peaceful movement or not? And as I'm saying again, put your nationality before your ideology. Basically accept the Constitution, which is inclusive for everyone, which defines you can do whatever you want. My faith may not allow me to accept that, but my nationality does. There's a big difference here. And finally, when you're in trouble, violence is not an option.
So the Muslim Brotherhood right now is not participating because it's not allowed to participate. There have been many arrested, assets frozen. It's not so much by choice. So tell us, to us that feels like a true failure in democracy, a true failure in political process when a president has to get ousted, where his supporters are actually criminalized, they're arrested, they're detained, and they don't even have access to their resources. Is your argument a security argument? Is that the rationale for eliminating a president and pushing aside a political movement?
There's a lot of questions there, but let me try to answer them quickly. First of all, the president was not pushed aside because of security. It was because of identity, trying to take away my identity. Islamists are part of Egypt. They are not Egypt. Secularists are part of Egypt. They are not Egypt. Egypt includes both. Any party, any movement that wants to exclude the other is not Egypt. Cannot have Egypt. That's why we couldn't wait for 4 years. That's my first point. My second point is, actually, the Muslim Brotherhood is excluded by choice.
Say more.
Definitely. For 5 months, they were not considered to be a terrorist organization. For 5 months, we tried to get them, even as a movement, to come and participate in the political process, to declare nonviolence. All we saw was more violence, an insistence that, no, what we did was right, we need to go back to where we were, and we continue. Furthermore, even declaring the Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, which, by the way, not sure how many foreigners there are here beyond Americans. What's ITA? Baader Meinhof in Germany, the Red Army in Italy. When you were attacked on 9/11, you determined that Al-Qaeda was an organization. I'm not questioning any of those, by the way. I'm just mentioning that every civilized country in the world, when faced with terrorism, takes extraordinary actions to deal with that.
That's why I was asking about the security.
But let me add to that. these same individuals who were in the past members of the Brotherhood, or of their political party, which until today is still legitimate, by the way. The movement was prohibited, not the party, up until now. These same individuals, if they not only rhetorically, but in actual fact, withdraw from the movement, accept their nationality as the primary foundation, and move away from violence, they're Egyptians. But that's not going to happen easily because they burnt a lot of bridges with the population.
Yep. So let me turn to the future, because I think many thought that the election of the Muslim Brotherhood was in many ways inevitable, because it was the only real political party to have been formed and to have delivered some services. And so what I wanted to have a sense of is the degree to which there are indigenous efforts to build political parties. And then move on, let me just give a follow-on question, because I think we tend to focus on elections and political parties a lot here in the US, but there's also that need for institutional reform. So I'd love to have a sense from you. In fact, Bruce McNamara mentioned the importance of institutions. Have a sense from you is the degree to which there is a need for and there is movement toward reform of security forces, of the police, of that variety of institutions that has figured so large. Not to mention sort of the non-security related portions of government, civil service in general.
It's a great question. Let me start with the second part of that. There's no logical reason. There's no logical way one can argue that we've had 2 revolutions in 3 years without admitting that we have an institutional problem, because we're responsible for governing. So we were doing something wrong. There's no question about that, especially on the first revolution. I've been going around the world and talking to my friends and telling them, look, give me money, that's fine. Appreciate that. But where I really want you to focus on is helping me in capacity building, in institutional capacity building. Because I'm not doing this to make you happy. I'm doing this because Egyptians want good governance. My responsibility to them is to be able to govern properly. And that means having the highest caliber of officials, not only in the foreign ministry. And I've been going around in my own ministry and saying, you're not doing the job to the level that these new people want, even though we're the best in town. But the same applies to every institution in government. It doesn't mean they're all bad. But we need to be a functioning democratic model for the Arab world. That's a very high standard, but that's Egypt's leadership responsibility. And it's also the only response to our own people. So we will need institutional reform in the legal system, in the interior ministry, which is the police I mean, it's not the forest as it is here, but yes, but does it mean they're all bad? No, of course not. But is there reform required? Of course there is. But that also brings in an important point, is that this is going to take time. It's not about changing characters. It's about changing the governing culture. It's also about the public accepting that you may have high hopes and aspirations, but if you're giving me a challenge with this kind of paradigm today, I can't reach that in 2 to 3 years. We need to go through a process. And look, you know this as much as I do, if not even more. Democracy is a messy business. It's a messy system. It's the best over the long term. But when everybody wants to participate, everybody has an opinion, you have every possible interest group that wants to that has an interest participating, there are lots of stakeholders. People like me in government have to get used to responding to all of these different stakeholders, not by following them, by leading them. But you can't lead them if you leave them. So I have to show them the way, engage them as I do this. To do that, I'm learning. I've said on Egyptian public television, I won't take lessons in diplomacy, but I will take lessons on how to be a diplomat in a democratic system.
Mm-hmm. So on public expectations, I'm so glad you touched on that, because there is an impatience. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's not only among Egyptians. I would argue that Western governments and their publics are expecting swift accomplishment in Egypt, and I'm assuming that this government and any future governments will be judged according to what they can deliver for the people. It'll be much less about ideology. It'll be much more about competence, capacity. So if you look at economic development in Egypt in its recent history, I don't mean the last 10 months, but the last 10 years, you've had some pretty remarkable economic growth. Mm-hmm. But yet I think it was like 119 on the Human Development Index. So you had this growth. You did have a middle class growing quite quickly, quite a successful middle class, or upper middle class. Yet that growth just wasn't broad-based. There were many left behind. What is it going to take by way of policy and by way of private investment
sure.
To achieve those objectives, a more inclusive development?
Credibility, good policy, and resources. What I mean by this is the following. I need time. We can't solve this overnight. It's going to take time to develop. We need a huge amount of resources to provide not the expectations, the needs, even before the expectations. The only way to do that is for you to take credible positions with your people. We need to explain to the people what the economic situation is, how we intend to do that, where the priorities will be. They should not be to somebody like me. Believe me, the government doesn't pay me very much, but I'm reasonably well off. There's no other way to do this. I tried to do the same thing in our foreign ministry. 3 days after I came into office, I laid out a plan for what I was going to do the whole year. Because the mandate for this government is basically until the elections, which is a 12 months period. And people said, why in the world are you doing this? My answer was, because the expectations are so high. They think I'm going to solve all these problems overnight, and I can't. Mm-hmm. So I need to get them on board with what the plan is. And then I need to deliver, providing good policies, and then tackling one point after the other. The first month or so in office was a nightmare. Everybody wanted to know why we weren't back in the leader of the Arab world and the most prominent international player worldwide. Nobody wanted to wait. Slowly, people started to say, well, this guy said this 3 months ago. Maybe we should listen. And the credibility started to gain a little bit. We still haven't reached where we want to reach, because it's a long battle. But I call on the next Egyptian president, whoever he may be.
Or she.
No, because you only have 2 candidates now. I don't lie. I'm very honest with you.
It's not the future.
The next one. There are only 2 candidates. There was an applicant, a woman applicant, but she didn't get the number of signatures. But I call upon him to be straightforward, candid with the people. Tell them they'll wait for you. They'll follow you if they trust you. Hot air won't get you very far. It may get you through 100 days, but it won't get you very far. But if they trust you, they'll be ready to compromise a little bit on subsidies, compromise on expectations. And then and this brings me back to why I'm here, to get the kind of resources we need will require the right policies domestically and internationally, but also to have an international relationship with people who want to come and invest in Egypt, who can help, and they will only do that if they feel we're part of the international system. But I want to make a point here. I've always complained to Egyptians that they're not proactive enough. I like to go face to face with issues. If I have a problem with a Western tradition, I should talk about it. I should go and say this doesn't fit in my system. There's a difference between the value and the tradition. If not, the majority will ultimately rule, and all we'll be doing is complaining. But at the end of the day, in having worked my life in the international domain, if you get 60 to 70% of what you're looking for, you've succeeded. Because nobody gets 100%.
So I'm going to move to investment because you raised that, because we just had this panel. Fred Seacrest of the Abraj Group argued that we need to move away from short-term thinking, not only in politics, as we've been talking about, but in business, and move to the creation of long-term value. So I wanted a sense from you where the investment opportunities are that'll make a difference. Are they in small and medium-sized businesses? Are they in actually, very small and growing companies? Are they, in non-agricultural rural investment or ICT? Where are the opportunities that will make a difference?
Great question. I've known Fred, by the way, since he was working with Davos many years back. Let me answer that a little bit differently from what he said, although he's right. We need long-term plans. The investment for long-term plans, energy infrastructure. Energy and infrastructure. That's where the real potential is in the long-term investment. But we need short-term employment gains. So I need to invest in small and medium-sized companies. Why do I say this? Egyptian banks don't loan small and medium-sized companies. There's no collateral. We don't have the system where a young entrepreneur will go with an idea to a bank and say, will you lend me this? Not because the bank doesn't know how to work. That's not our culture. We always used to leverage a mortgage or whatever it is. Well, the economies of today are knowledge-based. They're not asset-based, or knowledge is a fundamental asset. We have to change that. So for the small and medium-sized endeavors, we need international support. And it's quick money that's important here, because we have about 13–15% unemployment. If you look, however, oh, you're worried about that? Wait until you see the next figure. If you look at educated youth, it's up to 30%. Put women into the dimension, and women are equally paid, by the way, in Egypt. It goes up another 10%. I can't waste an educated resource. And I can't invest, as Egyptian financial system, in every bright idea, because the checks and balances in doing that don't exist. So strategically, energy and infrastructure, but we do need, and frankly, a lot of your interest areas here would be useful. We need international support in small and medium-sized companies, because they are employment heavy as well.
Yes. Yeah. So you mentioned women a couple times. And I was surprised to read an article in Thomson Reuters that said, in essence, now for the big surprise, the worst place to be a woman in the Arab world is in Egypt. Are they right? Is that, what is the status of women going forward? Is it actually getting less equal?
No, I think what they're referring to, and it's an embarrassing thing, harassment has increased.
Yeah.
In many ways, it goes back to what I was arguing about. We used to be a very tolerant, inclusive society. You did what you wanted to do, and nobody interfered with what you were doing. As we became less tolerant, people gave themselves the right to decide what is right and what is wrong. Then they made generalist value judgments, and you found the peer pressure on women and men, by the way, to follow the crowd. And it also gave the right to some in government and some in society to decide whether they thought this was correct, corrupt, or not, in terms of individual practices rather than government practices. So that's what he was referring to. The political role of women is increasing. They are equally paid. We have more, I'm pretty sure we actually have more Egyptian women ambassadors than America does. We have 13 to 15% of our diplomatic service as women, and 15% are ambassadors. But in elected office, they're weak, because culturally they can't get the votes in different areas, and therefore we have a special provision that allows the president to appoint I think it's 5 now, positions where he normally gives to women and Christians, because they also have a problem in elected office. And secondly, in private equity, they still are weak. This has increased. But I'm pretty sure that what was meant by that was the harassment issue, which is part of the breakdown of law and order generally in Egypt, and also the issue of intolerance.
I think, and also reproductive rights was, I think, a piece of that.
Yes and no. That's a cultural problem, not a legal problem, because we prohibit now female circumcision. It is prohibited by law. But culturally, it still happens, in a legal fashion.
So let's turn very quickly to the role of philanthropy. There are not that many large, global foundations that are active in Egypt. There's the Aga Khan Foundation, there's the Ford Foundation. And in fact, both Darren and Mirza are here. There are public foundations like the Global Fund for Women. Under your law, and this has been the case for a long time, grants from outside need to go through the government and be government approved. And I don't know whether that's having an effect of depressing giving or not. But I wanted a sense from you of where philanthropy is playing a positive role, where it's not all that relevant, and where it can play a negative role in Egypt.
Let me first put the onus on the Egyptians. Egyptian recipients need to be more transparent in their books, and the Egyptian government, consequently, has to feel more confident that they're getting all the information. That's the obstacle, really. It's not that we prohibit philanthropy from abroad. It's that you see NGOs in Egypt with huge bank accounts and very few programs. And nobody explains how these bank accounts have emerged as such. Because of that, the government has been hypersensitive to civil society generally, and while in most cases it's come out on the right side of the discussion, in some cases it's been particularly tough on organizations. But if there was greater transparency, the government is definitely supportive of philanthropy. Philanthropy so far has been mostly in the social area. I'd love for it to be more and more in education, because that is the core of capacity building. I mean, I'm betting on the younger generation. We're teaching them a lot, but they're teaching themselves at least as much through the internet and so on and so forth. Now, I can do that for the highly qualified student or those in the larger cities, but that's not always the case in the poorer areas in Egypt. And it's not about building school buildings.
Yeah.
We do that. It's about giving the programs, training the teachers, developing the programs. So philanthropy, I'd love for it to focus on the education area in particular. In these, what we call the shanty towns, would be an area of tremendous importance. But I do that with the government because these shanty towns tend to be a social nightmare, and they're human beings. They need to be helped. But they also are taken advantage of from a lot of criminal elements. So it's sort of a delicate mix there. But we need help on that because it's tearing the social fabric of families, frankly.
And unfortunately, I'm using more of your time than you have to offer, so I'm going to just ask one closing question, and that relates to an area where, I mean, the Ford Foundation, in fact, their work is in human rights, women's rights. I mean, it's a range of political, sort of rights-based issues as well as services. And I know right after President Mubarak fell from office, there was many arguing within Egypt that the troubles came from foreign sources, and that was the time when the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute, where their workers in Egypt were detained for
Sure.
quite a bit. And is that distrust still a part of Egyptian political life. And what does that say for that portion of the philanthropic agenda, the democracy building part?
Again, to prove to you that I'm not used to doing my job, the answer is yes. This trust still does exist. But let me explain that very quickly for you. I was ambassador in Washington up until 2008, and I was arguing with my own government. Stop allowing for these NGOs to work out of Egypt without a license. Give them a license, or tell them they cannot work. We're planting the seeds of a major problem. If you start allowing people, if you accept that they work, but don't give them a license, because ultimately you're creating a parallel system. What happened ultimately is, many of these NGOs were working for 4 or 5 years, and the Germans were working for 30 years. So they assumed that governments would accept this. And then when you had the revolution, people became a bit hypersensitive about this, and they saw a lot more money coming in to these NGOs, which was surprising in the numbers. But if you looked at what they were working on democracy issues. So with revolutions and capacity building, they were justifying the increase in money because of the increased interest. But at that point, the government felt they're illegal, and we need to put our foot down. So my point there was, the NGOs should not have been working without a license, and the government should have told them at the very beginning, A, B, and C, you can work, this is your license, D, E, and F, for one reason or the other, you cannot work. That was a sorry episode that all are to blame for, everyone there at the time are to blame for. As we develop our more democratic system, as we mature into a full democracy, we will have to become, in practice, not only in law, in practice, much more tolerant to civil society, international civil society. Local civil society are fine, international civil society. But we should be much more rigorous in that you want to work here, it has to be transparent. I don't believe in being complacent in ignoring the law and then deciding to apply it when you want. And I don't believe that whether it's a French NGO or an American NGO, that they can work in my country without a license.
I'm going to ask Gro Bundtland to come up and join us, because she's already mic'd, and see if she has one question of you, Gro, and then we're going to move to a conversation just between me and Gro.
Sure,
so,
thank you.
Gro, would you like to come on up and join us? Now, the reason I'm asking, Gro, is because you're a member of the elders, and the elders, in fact, met with President Morsi, but the elders have played a role interacting and being, part of this transition to some extent. And I just wondered if you had any questions for the minister. I'm sorry to pop this on you with no warning, but you're used to me.
You know, you were in the middle of of the discussion about some of those issues that we were concerned about. Mm-hmm. When we met with President Morsi back during his time, the questions that you have been asking now. And you have explained, about license, about change in the system because of suspicion and because of new money getting in. These are the questions, these are the answers that we got. But people are still concerned. And of course, when, as you said, for 30 years, people have been working in a harmonious manner in your country, and then they feel clampdown is coming upon them and stopping them from doing their work. It's not surprising, although you can give, a kind of formal legal explanation. So I think it would be good if these issues were better sorted out and understood on both, on the international NGOs and with the Egyptian government. I'm sure you agree with that, because it still is a difficult issue.
I don't disagree with you at all. Kofi Annan has raised it with me, but Israeli has talked to me about it. As I said in the beginning, I, in the past, was telling my own government, you should apply the law, because this is going to break out at the wrong time. Now, the real key is, once we get the institutions of government completely in place, is transparency.
Yes.
If the work is open, we need to be much more progressive in taking advantage of the generosity of international civil society. At the same time, it has to be transparent and clear. Our first problem with civil society, by the way, goes back to the 80s, late 80s, and it was about money coming into Islamist movements.
Yeah, well.
Exactly the same issue, huge amounts of money, where are these programs going?
Yeah.
And we didn't solve it by forcing transparency. We solved it by stopping the money, and it disappeared for a while, and it came in different ways. And then it came back again with a different group at a different reason, in a different context. Takes me back to the first point I was making. Had we put together good governance, we wouldn't have had two revolutions. But I also argue, international civil society has to be ambitious, idealistic, but also respectful to and realistic of what can be done at which point in time. If things aren't possible now, be careful, because if you start violating the law, governments correctly have the right to apply the law. But engage them. I want them to work with me to make me a better Egypt. I'm not going to be Norway or Sweden, but work with me, and let's do this.
And so you get to keep your mic so you can ask her a question later. So,
okay.
So first, please join me in thanking Minister Fahmy.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John.
Keep your mic if you have a question of Gro.
Okay.
So,
Oh my goodness, you sink deep.
I know these are. The problem is that they don't make yellow pages anymore. So when I was a child, you could sit on stacks of yellow pages at the dinner table and almost look like a grown-up, or certainly feel like one. So now we're turning to the rest of the world, not just Egypt. But Minister Fahmy, I need to tell you, and Gro will back me up on this, is that you never see a foreign minister who speaks without notes. Never. I've literally, and living in Washington for 30 years, I've never seen that before. So I am grateful to him for being, for taking that on. So Gro, we started these 3 days together focused on the ways in which development is being redefined, the way in which we look at it today. And we felt we had to close with you because we wanted to close with you, but you're the person who caused the last sea change in development. It was the commission that you led that got known as the Bundtland Commission, and the report that you issued that got known as the Bundtland Report, and this is 25 years ago.
Yeah, even more, yeah.
And where you put forth, by the way, Gro just celebrated her birthday, so we're thinking in terms of time. You put forth the notion of sustainable development, and then you defined it. And you defined it as pursuing a pattern of development that allowed current generations to meet their needs while preserving the ability of future generations to meet theirs. And I wanted a sense from you of how are we doing? How are we doing based on that roadmap that you put forward more than 25 years ago?
Well, so first, I think there's reason to underline the fact that you are asking the question and that people across the world in political, NGO, civil society, and educational institutions all are aware of the concept, aware of the basic importance for the future of the world and for humanity. That is a kind of a major breakthrough if you look historically at this. Now, that does not mean it's now 27 years since we delivered the report. And in historical terms, that's a short time. But in a lifetime like mine, I was in the end of the 40s when the report was finished. And I'm now 75, and I'm watching what happens and what doesn't happen. You know, not as happy about everything that's not happening. In many of the areas that needed urgent change, not so much has happened. And of course, we have the climate issue hanging over us as a real threat. And the inability of global governance and countries in cooperation finding solutions is a real threat to the future of humanity, because humanity is dependent on planet Earth. So, you know, that is a tragedy. But then, as I have said that, I never lose my optimism. In September this year, the Secretary General has called a one-day full concentrating, a day of summit in the United Nations General Assembly week, where the heads of state and government are going to report to each other and to the UN about what they are doing on all the issues which are relevant to deal with the climate change issue. They're based on their national decisions, on their national policies, legislations, budgets. What are we doing and what are we achieving and what is the plan for the next 3 to 5 years? So he is trying to build from bottom up to something that the world has not been able to do in what we should have done, to make an agreement across the world about, committing to do certain things to save the planet and humanity. Now, since we haven't been able, the Secretary General is now doing his utmost to try to push from bottom up, because many nations, and certainly the one we are in now, doesn't want to commit to international agreements in this area. Yeah. So far has not been able to. There is a lot of opposition in the US to making real commitments. It comes from many sources, and I can go into some of those, but let me leave it. I think the audience here knows you are not doing what you should have been doing in this country on these issues. And the poor president is not able to get a majority behind what's necessary to be done. However, then you have the issue of the US and China. Because for many years now, all the time since Secretary Ban came into office, when he has put global climate challenge as one of his major concerns, then the blame game has been going on between the US and China. The US representatives and US senators saying, we are not stepping up and committing until China is part of the answer as well. We are not undermining US competitiveness and having China move up and polluting more and more. Although, of course, the US pollutes per head 4 or 5 times more. Anyway, that blame game has been going both ways, and nations have been siding up behind them, saying as long as China and the US are not doing something serious, why should we? So I have a certain hope now that this bind can be opening up, that maybe US and China is ready to make some agreed commitments, the two of them. And if we listen to Obama and to the Chinese leader in September, maybe it could be a breakthrough that other nations cannot any longer roll up behind one or both and say, we are washing our hands, we are not doing anything, because we must move now.
Now, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report several weeks ago, their report, in which they noted that the burden of climate is falling disproportionately on the poor.
Yes.
That they're the most harmed, and of course they're the least responsible and the least able to adapt. What is our obligation to them?
Well, that has been part of the whole puzzle of how to deal with this from the very start. From the Commission report in '87 to the recommendation that we made in that report that the world needs to come together at summit level in 5 years to take stock of what we have done, and we meaning especially the OECD countries, the rich world, who were the ones responsible for what had already happened. And so, in Rio in '92, we signed the Climate Convention, which is in a way exceptional in international history. A treaty signed, a convention signed after only 5 years since that report. Then 5 years after that came Kyoto. Kyoto was an attempt to then do what the convention told the rich world was responsible to do. So the Kyoto responsible countries were the rich countries of the OECD area. Some held back. The US withdrew the signature that Clinton made under Bush. And there were other countries that never signed, Australia, for instance. Now, that process made just some efforts. But then, as China, Brazil, India, South Africa, big parts of the forward developing world started moving into being, developing with higher percentage of economic growth, contributing to the sum of what's being polluted, sent into the air. Then they had to be part of the picture, not only the Kyoto countries. As time has passed, the Kyoto countries are getting down to 30% of the emitted, and then down to 25% soon. So we need the rest of the world to be part. And that's what's going on now, and which has been so difficult, which didn't happen in Copenhagen 2009. We were all hoping for some kind of global agreement. But one thing happened which was important. And it happened because several leaders, including Obama, worked hard for hours in a meeting together, trying to get at least the 2-degree agreement. No more increase in global temperature, average temperature, than 2 degrees Celsius by 2050. So that has been important. There was one result out of Copenhagen. And since then, this building up from bottom up has been going on. But I can tell you, as the UNFCCC, the negotiating system for the climate convention, the leader of that is looking at it. We are below 50%. When she sums up what every country is doing or committing to doing, the sum of that is still below 50. Mm-hmm. So, we need a major step forward in the meeting in September in New York, and we need more maturity across the world before the important meeting in Paris in 2015. That's what, so I'm still hoping, Jane, yeah.
So the Brundtland report didn't just say what we should aim for, but also how we should aim, how we should do it. And it really presented the whole notion of a division of labor amongst private sector, private actors generally, but the private sector, the philanthropic and civic sector. As you look at the role that the private sector is playing in the whole issue of climate, aren't we seeing a normative shift, a shift in which private sector actors are saying we want to reduce our carbon footprint, we want to be pursuing the alternative technologies? What are we seeing coming from the private sector?
Well, partly we have seen in the last at least 10 years that the progressive parts of the private sector and several of the big multinational companies who have progressive leaders and progressive boards are saying what you just said and really are hoping for global regulation so that you can level the playing field in the right way, in such a way that companies can know that they can be competitive while doing the right thing. This is what now is a problem. Many companies, however, are moving because many nations also are having regulations that are pushing companies to make change. Like in Norway, where in 1990, we put a CO2 tax on the continental shelf of Norway. There was an outcry, in Norway, but across the world, especially from every oil exporting country. How can this woman, Prime Minister from Norway, put a CO2 tax on her own exporting industry? How crazy. I mean, when I came to Rio then, in just a year or two after, every leader of the Gulf and other oil exporting countries of Latin America and so on lined up to see me. They were saying, why you have to change that policy? You are undermining the future value of our oil resources. And I said, that's what needs to happen. Okay? And now we have debates across campuses in the US about divesting in the whole of fossil fuel sector. So, I mean, meanwhile, you know, in those 20 years or more, things are moving ahead. People are understanding how these things are linked together. Mm-hmm. And by the way, all the poor people in poor nations, and even poor people in rich nations, because people tend to forget them, they need energy, but they need renewable energy, because the right to energy and the need for energy is fundamental. The Egyptian foreign minister was, when he answered you, he said, energy is important, in addition to small companies. Now, energy is important everywhere, and certainly in poor countries. They need clean electricity. Their children need to be able to read their lessons at night, not over a candle or some kind of fossil fuel lamp. And, you know, they also need better ways of cooking their meals, instead of polluting themselves, their baby on the back, and while they are cooking their daily meal. Mm-hmm. Because that's what's happening now with the use of charcoal and other terrible sources of energy. So we have a sustainable energy question. Sustainable development and sustainable energy are linked together, and in the whole picture, women's roles in societies is absolutely crucial for sustainable development.
When you were elected Prime Minister at age 41, it was after a career in medicine. You're a physician. Mm-hmm. And so obviously what I want to turn to now is the role you played as Director General of the World Health Organization, because you took that Brundtland Report experience with you into it. And in fact, your approach to some of the larger health questions, health challenges, was to look at public-private partnerships. And in fact, Darren McKeever from the Gates Foundation is here. Tell us a little bit about the role that organizations like Gavi, that have just, you know, the Global Alliance Vaccine Initiative, that have emerged in the past decade, they're not only there to mobilize resources, but also to harmonize the activities of all three sectors in promoting global health. So say something about that experience.
Yes, you are right. You know, when I looked at WHO in the kind of the months before I entered and became finally elected as their new leader, as I was planning what kinds of reforms were necessary, it was exactly, I was looking at the WHO, its limitations in its ability to move large change and much larger amounts of resources into the crucial areas of preventing ill health, and of course also in dealing with disease. So because it was a center of excellence within the United Nations family, that's how it was born, how the Constitution is created. But of course we have no sanctions to put on any government if they are not pursuing a good, well-founded health policy. And if they don't put a health system in place that people can reach, and if they don't vaccinate their children, we are helpless in a sense. So we can give recommendations, we can argue, and I did, but I also knew I have to get global health issues onto the agenda of the leaders of government, not only to the health ministers, because they are usually at the end of the table in any government. So we needed to speak with the leaders of government, the foreign ministers, we also did that, and the finance ministers. In addition, we had to mobilize the private sector in a much more effective way. And there were people out there, as Gates and others, who were willing to listen and to be part of the answer to how we could mobilize much more effective action. So we worked, and the interesting thing for me, coming from a country where we have a strong state, we have a welfare state, but we have always, Norwegian governments in the whole of the post-Second World War period, when our economy has prospered and we have had a good development pattern and a good democracy, it has all been done with the participation of the employers and the employees the labor unions, in such a way that we can have a harmonious development of our economy, and the social reforms are integrated in a way that we don't undermine the future of our economy. So this has been happening. So I was used to thinking about the private sector as part of the solution. And many people, public health people in the WHO and in UNICEF, other places, ooh, be careful about the private sector. They are businesses. They have only bottom line profit. Be very careful. We have to keep this in the kind of public arena. That was the attitude. And I can tell you, only when Bill Gates placed $750 million on the table and told me and Carol Bellamy of UNICEF that unless you go together and make a more creative, more effective institutions to deal with childhood vaccinations, which had been falling down, I'm not going to give this 750 unless these changes happen. And I was convinced that we had to mobilize the private sector in any case. So for me, it was wonderful, but it gave me an instrument to tell my own people and to tell the people of UNICEF and Carol, this is how we can now really move creating Gavi, and we did. And we listened to the experiences of the private sector being results-oriented, in addition to socially consciousness that is basis of thinking in the UN system. So combining them, we managed to move this up and have much greater results. So millions and millions of children have been vaccinated because of this. I'm using it as one example because Gavi was the first major attempt. Then came the Global Fund to fight tuberculosis, malaria, and AIDS, and other institutions of this kind, which adds to the efficiency of the whole system. And it doesn't undermine the United Nations. This was one thing that many people believed. This is dangerous, Gro. Because look, we have no longer control over the vaccination agenda, etc. I said, look, we are going to be the center of excellence. We are going to be able to be the knowledge base, the evidence base, the system telling the world about what the correct protocols are and what needs to be done. That's the crucial role. And then inspiring others to come to the table and help have this happen.
And of course, I mean, one of the big challenges of global governance is the need for new institutions, right? And Gavi and GAIN and others are perfect examples of a social innovation that's catching up with the kinds of challenges we face. Staying with health for a moment and going to just good old national governance, let's talk about the role of good governance. I'm thinking about, for example, a situation where polio is almost eradicated. Almost eradicated, but there's no such thing as almost. I mean, you don't. Right.
Almost, yeah.
But almost doesn't do you any good. You have to get there, and but it's in where you still see outbreaks is where governance is weak. And let me just sort of put a sharper point on it. We've had new reports of polio in Syria where it hadn't existed in the midst of civil conflict. So say something about the role of governance and the strengthening of health systems as well.
Yeah. So I was saying that, basically health systems and basic education are crucial parts of any democracy or any government, even if it's not democratic so far. So I think it's important to make clear to any nation, any government, that they are basically responsible for the fundamentals with regard to their own people. If we don't do that, but just take for granted that if countries are poor, then we have to help, which is good. But if that country thinks that it can, get funding from the outside for even the basic needs of their people long term, this doesn't work. We have to be able to convince governments about some basic human rights issues which are self-evident parts of any reasonable government. Now, that doesn't mean there are many poor countries who are not able to, even given that they are trying, what I'm saying, they need our support. Maybe for years because they are so poor. And maybe there are some of those countries that are not so corrupt and where the elite is not taking all the money into their own pockets, which is another difficult issue globally. However, even then, we cannot stay back and look at people suffering. And in Syria, we have a tragic situation. And here, a country that has been reasonably well run, compared to many others, is in civil conflict and war, civil war, for years. And of course, their system has broken down, which means that polio vaccination is not there in big pockets of Syria at the moment, because the people who used to be doing this are no longer there. They have fled, or the international community are helping doing it, are not allowed or dare to come. So we get these pockets of difficult and dangerous health consequences of conflict. And other parts you can have issues, for instance, with polio vaccination, because of misuse of religion. You know, trying to spread on a religious basis to poor parts of a country, don't get your children vaccinated. This is the Western world trying to stop your reproductivity. I mean, we had that in parts of India, we have had it in parts of Nigeria, and it's been very tough to overcome, because when people have campaigns, you know, into populations, scaring them, it really takes a lot of effort and many people to overcome those kinds of barriers.
And of course, in the case of Pakistan, a health worker was used to gain entry.
Well, Pakistan, yes. I should, when I said India, Pakistan certainly too.
But there was a situation where distrust of health workers and went on the rise.
Even get killed, yes.
Which was really, really sad. We're focused on philanthropy here. Increasingly what we're seeing, I mean, you talked about whether philanthropy is there to undermine governments or to strengthen them, and increasingly I'm seeing incredible sophistication on that question. And that there is an effort, for example, particularly in the area of global public health, to strengthen the health ministries, strengthen their capacity in the process by sharing data, you know, giving them what they need to do their job well. I shouldn't say giving, but sharing. And in the process, so I think where are you seeing the greatest positive effect from that kind of effort to strengthen health systems?
Yes, it's right that, you know, some years ago, the Secretary General also took an initiative about global health issues, trying to ask us, where are now, this is only like 4 years ago or so, in the pursuance of the Millennium Development Goals, what now needs to have stronger focus so that we can get to our targets. And one of the things that, there were two main issues that then were debated and he supported and took issue, was that we need to help develop health systems, and that needs to happen with the support of countries, communities, businesses, philanthropy, you know, donors, everything. Because unless that is better based across the poor countries of the world, then the efforts we are doing on trying to fight a number of diseases and prevent, in the first place, tragedies is going to be undermined. Then it was mother and child. So the 2 Millennium Goals linked to mother and child were focused, in addition to health systems, broadly speaking. That has led to more collaboration in many areas across the different entities that are involved. And this is important. And by the way, Jane, you know, I was speaking with a venture capitalist a couple of weeks ago who came and brought me to a meeting, and we were speaking in the car. So I said, how do you define social
social innovation, social enterprise.
So school. I was talking school foundation,
social enterprise,
social entrepreneurs.
Yes.
And it was an interesting discussion again about this. But it ended by me saying to myself and to him, now I am more scared about the definition. If you say philanthropy, social entrepreneurship, and then governments and institutions, whether national or international or public institutions, and private companies. I mean, you have, but in this business, the private sector of this, I am getting more worried when I listen to some people that the companies who are private companies and that have basically bottom line profit as their goal, if they start thinking that philanthropy, governments, and then the social entrepreneurs are responsible for all the social and environmental needs, so we can continue doing or more limited, arena. That's really dangerous, because that is what was the case until 30 or 25 years ago. When I came to Davos in the end of the 70s, early 80s, the general melody in the whole of the multinational and business companies who were there at the World Economic Forum, any issue of social, environmental, or global aspect, they said, oh, that's up to governments. We are having a bottom line profit. They never say that the last 10 years. They have understood that business, and I'm now talking regular business. They now know, as certainly the most progressive of them, they have to be part of also taking care of social and environmental issues, ethical issues in the way, and you spoke about this in the panel just before the Egyptian minister was here. Because this would be very, if we help from philanthropy, from social entrepreneurs, and the big part of business, multinational, everywhere, is going to take for granted that they can lean back and it's not our issue. That's dangerous, because what we need is everyone stepping up to the challenge, because it's the sum of what all of us are able to do, from the government, from the local community or local government, to the private sector totally. That's what it will help us as quickly as possible get to sustainable development. Yeah.
So, I'm sure you figured out by now that Jean Kufour could not be, we were connecting by video conference and we run into technical problems on the Ghana end. But I wanted to just close with a question and a close. First, please stay right after this for a musical ending, because I think it'll help you leave with hope. But also let me just call attention to, Toby had a big effect on me. You weren't here, Gro, but he told us to raise our hand if we were over 60 or hoped one day to be over 60. And there was a remarkable number of hands went up. And we always think, because you became Prime Minister at age 41, we always think of you as somebody who broke, and the first woman, you break every glass ceiling. But now you're a member of the elders, officially. And what we're seeing, it feels like we're seeing a redefinition of service grow. You've got, Jimmy Carter, Tony Blair, Kofi Annan. Jean Kufour is also somebody who's really redefined service, and you have Ernesto Zedillo. I mean, you can go all around the world and find people who were heads of state who, instead of retiring to a lovely life by the seashore, choose instead to take the knowledge they developed and the leadership skills that they almost innately have and apply them to the world's toughest problems. So I guess I turn to you, and first of all, I can't imagine you retiring. It's just an impossible thing to even imagine. But have we fundamentally changed our notion of service, our sense of obligation to the larger whole, so that we no longer put it in this job or that job, but instead have it take us from the beginning to the end of our lives?
Well, yes, maybe, Jane. I think, you know, you feel responsible that using your experience, you make the contributions that you can do at different stages of your life. And that never ends. You can always make a contribution if you are reasonably in shape and healthy to be able to do so. So you continue saying yes to the kinds of challenges that you know you can contribute to dealing with. And the other issue, when you speak about all these former leaders that you mentioned some names, I'm sure, you know, it is easier to continue working for international concerns that you have been learning about and dealing with to try to have addressed during your life in public service, when you know there are other leaders from different parts of the world who are active and willing to do the same. Because it means you continue having a base of contact and friendship and inspiration from other people who are feeling the same way. That helps, because as an individual on your own, it's not so easy to do this. So for me, the elders has been a new inspiration. Most of those elders were people I knew, had worked with, and of course we are inspiring each other to be able to do things even if we are 75, 80 or 90, which is the case of Jimmy Carter, somewhere this or next year. But the man is full of energy, and he will never step down until somebody else decides that.
So please stay for the music. I want to tell you, we will be, I don't have time to do a summing up from the working groups, although we have it, and so we were going to email it to you and keep that conversation going. And really thank you. Everybody in this room is such an extraordinary expert and such an extraordinary giver. Whether you're a philanthropist or leading an NGO or a social enterprise. And you know, the world is so much better for it. So what we all feel is gratitude. So thank you to all of you. And I think we have to slip off.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes, it's all right. Take my message to my brother and tell him twice. Can you feel it? 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 Can you feel it?
If all souls were brought here to care, why are there so many crying? If all souls were brought here to love, why so much needless dying? The earth is one country and mankind its citizens. Let us raise a flag of our one human nation. Bury the hate and water with love. It's time to bring in the world. Bring in the world to a place of harmony. Bring in the world to a place of unity. As we wrap our loving arms around this changing earth, we can bring in the world. Your way is not like mine, so why do I feel like I know you? We're worlds apart, yet here in my heart, I'm gonna keep moving towards you. I'm gonna keep moving towards you. Oh, the earth is one country and mankind its citizens. Let us raise a flag of our one human nation. Bury the hate and water the love. It's time to bring in the world. Bring in the young to a place of harmony. Bring in the world to a place of unity. As we wrap our loving arms around this changing earth, we can bring in the world. Bring in the young, the old, let your story be told. The near, the far, whoever you are, the wrong, the right, we don't have to fight. It's time to bring in the world. Bring in the young, the old, yet the story be told. The near, the far, whoever you are, the wrong, the right, we don't have to fight. It's time to bring in the world. Oh, back on. Time to bring in the world. Oh, help us, help all of us to bring in the bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, help us to bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, bring in the world. Oh, help us to bring in the world. Oh, the
I'm going to slip between you. This is microphone. This is the Oakland Interfaith Gospel Choir, joined by Gary, and thank you to our leader here. Thank you to Terry. Really wonderful.